Hello, it is Dark4 here, and I'm going to be showing you how I made a train covered in guns. The basic idea is the player controls the turrets on top. So you've got a train that can move around and has a bunch of cannons on it that should try to avoid shooting themselves, even when you point it and click with other train cars in the front. If the train is moving more quickly, this doesn't always work as well, though. And then in addition, when you open the doors, machine guns. Because why not? Destroy everything. So, this is what I'm going to be showing how to make. As you can probably tell just by looking at the part that we've got these turrets loosely crammed into the top of the train. This one does not have shall we say, proper art assets, as the hover tank did. But, for now, it works for just quickly showing something. And we can close the doors and the turrets and there stop firing. Alright, so let's show what this actually is. First of all, what we're using here is 4 train cars, all following each other. The train car itself is, let's see, this was not the, here we are, player gun tram is the one I was using. Pretty much it just started out as me taking the player-controlled tram, which is in the train controller demonstration areas. It has the train controller, pretty much all the same settings as that thing had. You got the camera controller, you got the forward truck as your root component, then parent to that is the rear truck and the front truck pivot. The rear truck, parachilded to that, or the child of the rear truck is the rear car pivot, which is an arrow. Here's an arrow. So, and then childed to the front car pivot is the actual main car itself. Then you got your raised doors and stuff, and also the spring arm, and onto this thing is pretty much the doors, the spring arm, the turrets, everything is put onto the main central body car itself. The actual additions that I put in here were, for the most part, the camera. I added a 0 to its name so that a turret control could pick it up. The various turrets, actors I added, 4 little machine guns and 2 cannon ones. 3 arrows right here, which I am using is a non-existent turret, and then a turret controller. The player-controlled type, not an AI one. So this is simply using these 3 arrows, which means that with the camera having the 0, this will look at locations. It doesn't actually there's no turret involved directly here. All of these are simply child actors. So let's look at how this is actually set up. The mainstay of the different stuff is right down here at the bottom. Left mouse button, we get all actors in the scene, remote turret 1, and a for each loop to fire. So when we press the left mouse button, we tell all these turrets to fire by an event that we have set up on them. But in order to tell them where to point, on a tick event, get controller for this player tram, is it a player controller? So this way, of all 4 of these trams, because they're all the same actor type, this for the record will not work in multiplayer. You'll need to do something a little bit different to identify, like maybe having an ID on each type of train, so every car in one person's train would be ID 1 and everyone in someone else's would be ID 2. You'd want to do a check for something like that. In this case, I didn't bother because I'm just doing one quick demonstration. But the idea here is it gets all of the remote turrets, and then using that turret controller that we have here that doesn't actually have anything itself on it, we can still use that to get the locations that our camera's pointing at. So we get the target location from here, and then we set the target location on all of these remote turrets. The remote turret itself is pretty straightforward. It's just a simple base, turret, barrel, emitter, and with a turret controller on it. The key part though, manually provide target location, is enabled on the turret controller. As a result, these turrets will, rather than caring about a camera or something, they will instead let us set their direction by setting the target location variable, which is what we are doing here over on this tram. So with this type of setup, it doesn't matter if you have these attached to these cars lying on the ground or stuck on a floating pig, whatever. The player's camera that is possessed on one of these cars is going to be responsible for directing every one of these turrets to where it should shoot. And then as far as that fire event, you get the turret controller, turret pointed at target. 0 because there's only one turret, so this is element 0 in that array. Is it true? So only when the turrets are pointed, in this case we set it for 10 degrees if I recall, so if the turret's pointed in roughly the right direction, only then can it fire. Then we get the emitter, get its world location, and use this as the start for a sphere trace for objects. Get forward vector of that emitter, this is the direction it's pointing, that'll be normalized, so we'll have an absolute value of 1 times 5,000, so it moves out 5,000 that direction, add it to that location, so we'll be moving out 5,000 from this location to wherever the end location is, and that is what this will be, which goes into the end. Radius 18, that's because the projectiles have a bit of thickness. If we just used a line trace for this, then you'd be more likely to have it so that one turret's pointing and it's just barely looking past the edge of another turret or something, but when it shoots, because the projectile's thickness, the projectile's side will still hit the turret, so that's why we're using the sphere trace. Trace object types, we have world dynamic and pawn, because that's what our train and turrets are made out of. And then the idea is, if we hit something with this trace, we will ask, does it have the friend tag? And if it does, we're not shooting. If we don't hit anything, or if we hit something that isn't friend, then we can still fire. Class defaults, down under actor tags, we have the friend tag on the turret, and similarly we have the friend tag on the player's train. So with this, the turrets will not shoot when pointing at our own train, or really close to. Once it goes from there, we go to a gate. This is more or less like I showed in the auto-aiming turret the other day. Slightly different order, but same effect. You enter, and then it will go and exit. Whenever you successfully exit it, it will first close the gate, then it will start a delay based on the reload time. I have set it to 0.6 seconds, which will reopen the gate in time, and then the third thing on that sequence is it actually spawns the projectile. In this case, I've messed around a little bit for the projectile size, and the rotation, because I didn't like all of them pointing and firing in exactly the same direction, I randomized the spawn a little bit by having a combine rotators. You take this, combine rotators off the rotation, and just like you would have used to split the get world transform, right click, split struct pin, and then you'll get these, each of the axes. Then create a random float in range, -3, 3, because I like 3 degrees. You can have a spread, a single variable linked up, which links to all of these 3, and then it links to a -1 to all of these, so one variable can easily control this. But I just did it quickly like this. The reason that we have 3 of these and not just one linking to all 3 is that each node only produces 1 random value per tick, but we don't want, because otherwise it would be like, say it hits 3 out of this range, it hits 3, that'd be 3 degrees up, 3 degrees to the right, and 3 degrees twist. Every single one of these would be offset by 3, and we like a bit more randomness. If you'll notice that it just doesn't look quite right. It's more like you're firing on a horizontal arc than a proper random spread. So we take that, we plug it in for this rotation, and then we spawn the emitter similarly, and that's the fire event. And that's more or less what we've got going on down here. Then going up a bit, you'll notice a lot of these events. This is because this player train controller was set up for multiplayer. If you do not have this version, update your train controller. If you have updated and still don't have it, then you're going to just want to manually overwrite it by saying add to project and overwrite files, because the automatic updating option in the Unreal Marketplace tool does not actually work a lot of the time from my experience. So, on the opening and closing of doors side though, we have this timeline. When it finishes, there's a switch which will detect is the timeline moving forward or backward. So if it finishes while moving forward, the doors would be open. That's what it's set up as. All this is originally what you'll already find there for opening and closing doors. When the doors are open, we, however, will want to tell the machine gun turrets, that they can become active. And for anything else, we tell them to stop deactivate. This array is made by, on the construction script, we simply take each of these MG references for the little machine guns inside of the car that I put. Construction script. Now, we've got each of these. We get child actor, so we actually are accessing the actor itself, and then we cast to the MG turret. You'll notice that we don't have an input value. That's because you can convert to impure or convert to pure cast. Converting to pure cast you do when you're pretty much certain that this will only return this one thing, which in this case we are, because we know that's exactly what these are, and we're never going to tamper with them ourselves. So then we get the AI turret controllers out of those little machine gun turrets, and we add each of those to the MG turret controller array, which is what we are later on referencing here to turn them on and off when the doors are open or doing anything else like closing. Then also on the event begin play, we would set them to be enabled or disabled whether the doors are open or not, because this controller is set up so that you can, in the options before the game starts, decide whether the door should start open or start closed. That's also what all this stuff before it is about, is opening or closing the doors. And the other thing that we have is we get all the actors of the remote turret 1, and we add them to a ignore actors on camera line trace for the turret controller. It can ignore actors, but we don't have options for that here, so we add that to that after the game has started. You could have it so it will update that every so often, but in this case I don't plan on adding or any new actors that it would need to ignore, so just on the begin play works for this. So we add this, then we get all of the player gun trams, and for each loop we add each of those to it. Then once that's completed we get the little MG turrets and add each of those to it, yada yada. And the idea is that with this, our camera will not be looking at any of our own actors and should try and only look through them to the ground and objects behind them when we're using this turret controller here, which is what's getting us this target location. So it won't provide a location on the train itself, even if our camera happens to be looking there. And that's more or less it as far as the changes went here. The other key part is MG turret. Let's see, pop this open. This one was more or less just one of the turrets taken from one of the hover drones. It's just got its little base and invisible cube, no collisions. The mesh for this, the turret, the barrel, and the emitter, and then the AI turret controller itself. By default I set them to not be active, and everything else is pretty much the same as it otherwise was. Simple machine gun. Starts out pretty inaccurate, but oh well. So this is this little actor, and then we just turn it on and off by, again, going through this area. We turn them on or off. So the basic result of all this being, we've got a train, we've got turrets, and any one of these remote turrets will always look at whatever the player possessed actor is, which we've auto-possessed the front actor in this train. And the other ones, because they're unpossessed, will, thanks to this part, is player controlled. If they're false, which means they're not possessed, they will not be messing around with their target and locations to everything else. And these little guns inside only turn on when we activate them by opening the doors.